Okay, so thank you for joining us for the Worldviews collection. Scott Shapiro, can you tell me a bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm the Chief Innovation Officer in the Mayor Jim Gray's office here in Lexington. Not a native Lexingtonian, so grew up in the Northeast and lived in New York City for 20 years, but came here to work with the mayor about 6 years ago.
Okay, and how did you find this job? How did you get interested in it?
Well, I had worked in the private sector most of my life, but had really wanted to segue into public service. Actually, my first job was working for the former governor of New York, then private sector, but I always knew I wanted to go back at some point. So age 40, I went back to get a master's in public administration as a way to sort of segue into public service, and was looking at and that was, I was living in New York at the time, MPA in Boston, was thinking about being in New York or DC, but there was a lot of chatter in our graduate school about how much more interesting it is to work at the municipal level. At the same time, my wife, who grew up here, wanted to move back, and so started talking with the mayor, and that's how things worked out.
Oh wow, okay. So you're from New York, and you went to NYU, right? What was your undergrad experience like?
Well, I went through a few majors: English, computer science, and then political science. Really enjoyed being in the city as an undergraduate. I was able to find interesting things to do outside of school as well, and that led me to I was on the 7-year plan at NYU, so I was able to work for first an investment bank and then the governor of New York while I sort of finished school up at night. So I was, and I thought it was my dream job. I was a writer for Governor Cuomo, writing press releases, but also columns, newspaper columns under his byline. Before I'd even graduated, and I thought I was always interested in politics and writing, and so felt very lucky to have that slot.
Was anything revealed to you working in that kind of position that you hadn't experienced before?
That's a good question. Revealed to me. So I didn't know the extent to which political leaders delegated certain tasks, and so some of the thinking around certain external communications, like a column, for example, that I was responsible for. The idea that would be devolved to me, I thought was amazing and scary at the same time. So that was one of the things that I sort of was confronted with. And again, I was quite young. I was still an undergraduate.
Right. Yeah. That's a tough load, it seems, for an undergraduate, full-time student, and then you have the duties of a politician, basically, or someone engaged in politics. How'd you kind of handle those two worlds?
It was a lot. It was a lot to juggle, but at the same time, I was doing everything I wanted to do. I loved being in school, and writing for a political figure that I greatly admired. I was just happy. I guess if you're happy doing something, it doesn't seem like a lot of work.
And so, after you graduated, you had a business of your own, I understand. Did you take any of those skills from working in the office to your kind of entrepreneurial head start?
Yeah, so we, with a partner, started a marketing agency. So we were focused on sort of branding and public relations, and worked with a lot of. It was during the .com boom, which was, for those who weren't born yet, which was in the late 90s, and So there was a lot of ideas and a lot of sort of new ideas all around the internet, and there was a lot of money funding those ideas. So we worked with companies to sort of help them figure out how to talk about what they do. And that was great fun, and it grew very rapidly. So I did that for maybe 7 years and then sold the company.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great accomplishment. I'm sure you were proud. Or were you at all?
Well, I mean, I was lucky to be in that position. I'm not at the time, I was not a natural entrepreneur. It just happened that someone who I'd worked with in the governor's office had a potential client that would help us sort of start this agency. So barring that, I'm not sure I had the drive to go start something on my own, but it turned out that it's a lot of fun to start your own company. You get to chart the direction, you get to stock it with people that you really enjoy working with, which is important. Go after the kinds of clients that you enjoy working with. So to have that kind of control early on was a lot of fun, and kind of glossed over my lack of experience at that time. There was a lot of that, so it was a big sort of learning curve, both operationally and in the industry. I was all of a sudden leading this agency at a very young age when I had only been in the industry sort of for a short period of time. So,
yeah, how old were you at that point?
Well, I was mid-20s.
Man, I can't imagine running my own company right now, 21, almost 22. So you have that experience in starting a new company, and from what I understand, your son has kind of inherited that entrepreneurial spirit. What's it like? Do you see any of yourself in your kids?
Oh, sure. Well, I have 3 boys. The oldest one is a computer engineering major here at UK, and he and I think similarly about opportunities. He's more entrepreneurial than I ever was. He's always thinking about things that how things should be, and I think feels a confidence in sort of thinking that through and potentially pursuing some ideas. So he's pursued a couple ideas so far, potential new companies, just very low level. Just so I think that's pretty impressive to do that at 19.
I'll say, yeah, that is impressive. And has he come to you for any like advice or words of wisdom and along this, or has he just been, I got this,
We talk about this stuff quite a bit. I'm not sure how much he takes my advice on things, but it's fun time for us together to be sort of talk through these kinds of ideas that he has. And I love it. I mean, I love working with new ideas, which is part of what I did in my company and also part of what I do in the mayor's office too.
Okay. And so you said you have 3 kids. How old is your youngest one?
8.
8 years old is a very interesting year. It's a very interesting time to be a person. And I imagine when you're a parent, like when you were about to have Will, like I can only imagine what was like going through your head leading up to like birth and then afterward. Keep kind of tell me your thought process around that.
Didn't know you'd be getting so personal in this interview. I'm happy to talk about it though. I had Will much younger than I thought I would. It was I was 28, and we were starting up this company, and it was kind of a crazy time because my wife, he was a highly planned pregnancy because we wanted to do it in the 4th year of her medical school, and then she would take 2 years to do a master's in public health, which would be lower key than going right into residency, which is just the hours are much greater, and your ability to have control over your time is trends towards zero. And so it actually worked out where we would, her last year of med school, and then she did an MPH, and then, but at that time it was a very crazy time, because just starting a company, having a child, living in New York, where things are just, especially with a new child, just all of a sudden, just there's a lot that you're trying to manage. It was a fun time, but it was very intense.
Yeah, that's, I imagine. Yeah, and
especially for someone I'd never been around babies before. Like, just in my family, for whatever reason, there were never babies around. So that was a very steep learning curve for me.
Yeah, yeah. And I also imagine that when you're thinking about the point of having that first version of you, you think about what's going to happen afterward, how you're going to like provide, but also like I imagine you think about the world that they're coming into. So what was the world like when Will was first born?
Well, the world was very exciting at the time. I mean, this was Bill Clinton was in office, and so things seemed to be trending the right way in terms of my worldview, and the sort of internet-based economy was exploding, and I found that all fascinating, and also my skills and interests sort of lined up with where the economy was exploding. So that was this nice match that happened, and for him coming into the world at that time, I think was I didn't have the concerns that I have today. I was just talking with neighbors, both physicians, about long-term global warming effects, and that to me is, and what that means for our children, their children. It's that's very different than being worried about a recession, or even temporarily not having money, or having to be in a job or live somewhere you don't want. Those are all sort of temporary things, but that you have some control over. But when you compare it with something like the way the government's trending right now, and sort of global warming writ large. When I say the way the government's trending right now, is sort of an unhelpful approach to foreign policy that could have dramatic consequences for my children. And then again, this lack of concern about climate change sort of puts having children in a different perspective, I think. Yeah.
No, definitely. I think you kind of touched on some of the anxieties that people feel about the current administration in terms of like the future, and how they feel that they can sustain themselves, and how the world at large will kind of keep turning. And I imagine it can be tough if you've had any questions from either your family or people around you about like the moral nature of America right now. Like, have you had any tough questions from your kids or anyone around you that have made you go, oh?
I mean, my 19-year-old Will is so thoughtful and well-informed. And I remember having the conversation when the current president was elected. This was a conversation we had during the midterms so that would have been 2014, when election didn't go exactly the way we had hoped, and I remember talking to him about the sort of long scope span of history in this country, and that yes, there are ups and downs, but it does seem as if we, I think, is this Obama quoting Martin Luther King Jr.? I'm not sure, but sort of the arc of bending towards sort of a better place. I mean, I do think that over time in this country we tend to make the right decisions, and it takes way too long, and it's not exactly the way it should be, but that's the general trend, right? We generally have, things like Social Security, and which is, among the most successful policies in the history of, governments. Have all seniors out of poverty. It's Medicare, Medicaid, recent things like, the gay marriage. So it's like we are trending towards a better place. Yes, it takes too long, and there are bumps. And I told him that one election, don't be concerned. We're headed in the right direction over time. But this last election, I wasn't able to. Since then, I feel like perhaps I'll be able to say the same thing down the road in a decade.
Mm-hmm.
But it's certainly the moves that are being made now just seem to have sort of longer term negative consequences where it'd be hard to dig out of.
So I think you have an interesting perspective coming from local government, because you're kind of in the place where change is supposed to happen for a local spot. So you can kind of attest to how long it might take for change to happen. And the event that I'm thinking of is the Confederate statues. Can you talk a little bit about just the controversy around that for those who might not know?
Sure. So on the Lexington has an old courthouse that's right in the center of the city. And on that courthouse sat two statues. There were two sort of Confederate leaders, and there was a movement across the country to understand these statues that had popped up at odd times in history, not after the Civil War, but it turns out that many of these statues were a PR campaign during times of Black advancement. That's when these statues started going up around the country as a way to communicate concern about that. And so that was certainly so there was some concern in Lexington about what we can do with these statues. Some cities were trying to get rid of them. We went through sort of an extended process where there was public comment. There was something called the Urban County Arts Review Board that took a long look at this issue, solicited feedback from the community. And then Charlottesville happened. And it was then the mayor had made the decision to move these, and part of that was these were sitting first of all in the center of our city, right? No other statues around. This is being held out as sort of a representative of our city, right? The veneration of these two Confederate leaders who fought to preserve slavery were sitting right there, and then the understanding that this was the site that these statues were on was Cheapside was a former slave auction site. So it seemed they had to be moved. There was really no other side to the issue, well, from my perspective. And so, but we wanted to do it in a way that was respectful for the folks who disagreed. We had to obviously we wanted to listen to everybody's opinions before we did it, and we wanted to do it in the right way. and so there was a process that went through, and it turns out that they were governed. We thought they were governed by this state committee, military historical statue committee, something like that. And we were waiting on who had to okay the movement of these statues. Charlottesville happened. Became clear we had to move it right away, as soon as we could. Waiting on this commission, and then we started doing some research around this commission, and we asked mayor's office, your law department. Someone asked for sort of a decision from the attorney general about did they really govern these statues. It turns out that the agreement had not gone through city council, so wasn't codified. And so once that decision was made, they were moved immediately. And there had been lots of background work over time to work with to find a suitable place for them. And it seems as if the Lexington Cemetery would be a great place for them. That's where they were buried. There were other similar statues there. So that there's a lot of effort that went into that. They accepted the statues under certain terms, but the background to all this was Take Back Cheapside, which was this advocacy group that really is this case study in how to be an advocacy group in the way they approached it. And it was they sort of created this group, gained allies, and they lobbied firmly, but not in a way that was off-putting. It was just this firm pressure to, like, we need to figure this out. We're here to help. How can we get this done? And it was really, and DeBron Thomas and, I'm sorry, his partner's name was, do you remember?
I don't.
Another gentleman who I met once before in that group. And they really helped work through the issue, change minds, and help be part of the conversation. When the conversation first started, when it was that Urban County Arts Review Board that was looking at it, and they solicited folks' comments on moving the statues, and this is before Charlottesville, but it happened there. The only letters we got, and we got lots of them, were just from folks who wanted to keep the statues. But during this process, really the conversation nationally as well as locally changed. And Take Back Cheapside was part of that. Charlottesville was part of that as well. And another part of that was the mayor of New Orleans, who had this speech that went viral about why the statues in New Orleans needed to come down. And I think that was the language he used and the just the moral the moral case he made was really hard to argue with. And I think he captured, and I'm not remembering I'll remember his name in a second. He really helped put words behind sort of how this should be talked about and thought about in a way that was helpful too.
How do you respond to people who say that taking down things like Confederate statues and removing Confederate flags from state buildings is erasing history?
Yeah, I understand that. I understand that argument. Erasing history, just because something is up there doesn't mean it can't be taken down. You have to look at the reasons why it was put up there. Again, my point before about why statues weren't put up there just after the Civil War. They were put up there to intimidate African Americans. That's when the statues, Jim Crow was when a lot of the statues went up. So erasing history, that's not where we learn history, is from a statue on the courtyard. That, to me, is a distortion of history. Lexington was not all in for the Confederacy, right? Lexington is not a city that celebrates folks who fought to preserve slavery. That's not who we are. It was never who the city was. The city was divided at best. More people from Lexington fought on the Union side than the Confederate side. That, to me, is a distortion of history that needed to be corrected.
Interesting. Yeah. I find it interesting that we kind of hold these physical ideas of what the past was, and we kind of have this idealized state of our past, and we tend to kind of ignore the remnants of the past in the present. So that means, for me, it means that when we look at a Confederate statue, we can take it down, and we also have segregated housing, which is very much a part of the past and is kind of exists now in the future too. And I understand that you said that we are moving forward and we tend to trend towards the right thing or progress. Does that mean that if nothing changes, it'll still get there? What do you think needs to change in order for us to kind of reconcile with the past in ways that are meaningful?
Deep question. Yeah, everything takes too long. Everything takes too long. With certainly with government, certainly even with social movements, everything takes way too long. This, to me, is there's tension, and it's in their names, between, being progressive, moving forward, being conservative. Moving forward is not always the right thing to do on every issue, but sort of more broadly, times change, people's attitudes change, the world progresses, and I think the job of government is to navigate that and move forward. The job of advocates is to push as hard as they can to change things, and government has to sort of lag a little bit behind to make sure it's done in a way that's as broadly representative as possible. So it's always going to lag a little bit, but some things don't just take too long, but they take way too long, and it's painful, and it's a sad part of our history. But I think why I got into public service is to try to do some good for the largest number of for citizens, and to try to make the city a better place.
Yeah,
make the world a better place. I think that's why anyone gets into. I hope that's why folks get into public service.
Yeah, that's fingers crossed. That's why they got into politics. So I think I just have one more question. So I'm going to set the scene for you.
Okay.
So you're on a stage, and you're behind the curtain, and when the curtain's open, there's one microphone, and in the audience is everyone in the world. What do you say?
Well, I guess I'd say a couple things. One, I think tolerance gets us a long way. Tolerance and understanding of each other's differences. I mean, it's just part of human nature to be sort of tribal in a way, and that's where sort of conflict arises. And if we can just be better at understanding, empathizing, reaching out, that really does, it's what I tell my kids, and it's what, it's really solves a lot of, or can lead to, productive dialogue and solving problems. The other thing is just more specific, and that is around around climate change is really something that's we're already seeing some of the effects of, and my kids are just still kids, and so that's something we need to act on.
Right. Worldviews, a societal journal. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.